All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to LinkedIn Live. We are so excited that you're joining us today. This is week 6 of In the Arena Live, where we come together to talk about this week's podcasts. So, for my live participants today, put in the chat, say hi, where are you calling in from? Ask us questions. I'm excited to be here with you today. My name is Kelly Chuck. I think it's been about over a month since I've gone live for this, but I am a learning partner on our learning and development team at LinkedIn, and I'm joined by my colleague.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Brown. I'm a senior manager on the learning and development team here at LinkedIn.
Great. So in today's session, we have 30 minutes together. We're going to talk about Monday's In the Arena podcast episode, where Leah Smart, who is in charge of the In the Arena podcast, interviews Bruce Feiler. And Bruce is an author of 7 New York Times bestsellers, and he's a thought leader on contemporary life. Bruce joined Leah to talk about his most recent book, Life is in the Transitions. And based on thousands of hours of research, this book reveals that most people's lives are inconsistent with the expected linear paths of success at work, in relationships, at home, and everywhere else. So, in fact, adults actually experience life disruptors every 12 to 18 months. And the big ones are what Bruce calls lifequakes. And so Bruce's work both reevaluates expectations of contemporary life and shares how to make meaning and magic after a lifequake. So Alex and I are kind of going to dive into 3 main topics here and kind of share how this resonated with us. And so the first one, Bruce says in his podcast, the linear life path is dead. And a nonlinear life involves a lot more transitions, and life transitions are a skill that we have to master. There's 2 main concepts. The life quake, that's described as kind of the blow. An example of this would be, as Bruce talks about, when he got cancer when his twin daughters were young. The life transition is more so the cure, and that's putting yourself on a different path. And these life quakes, life transitions, they can be voluntary, they can be involuntary. Both are still difficult because it's a shift in our lives. So I want you put in the chat if you're with me. In your lifetime, how many life quakes do you feel like you've experienced? And if you feel comfortable, put in the chat, how has that shaped you? And I want to turn to Alex. Have you experienced any life quakes, life transitions that are especially impactful?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the big one that probably comes to mind for everyone on here is just the lifequake of the last year and a half plus of suddenly one day being asked, at least for me, to start working at home. And just how disruptive that was to have to work from home, to be separated from so many people I love, to be worried about the pandemic and not really knowing where things were going to go. And I remember early on, I felt like a lot of people around me were in denial about where we were going with the pandemic. You know, I remember some leaders talking about, oh, when we return to the office and we'll be taking people's temperatures. And in my head, I was thinking, I'm like, I don't think we're going back to the office for like the next year. That's just my prediction. And really that level of uncertainty and just the adaptation that we've all had to go through in the last year, for me, that's a big one that comes to mind. And, you know, I think it's one we're all experiencing together. What about you, Kelly?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example. It's as Bruce says, it's the first time in about a century where we're all experiencing a lifequake together. And it's really interesting to see how different people have come out of this. Um, I I'll talk about a life transition kind of being putting myself on a different path that I've experienced. Um, when I Ever since I was 13 years old, I wanted to be a nurse, and largely because my little cousin was born prematurely, put into the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit, and I felt especially impacted by that and the great work that they were doing. And so I was like, yeah, I want to be a nurse. And so my whole college undergrad experience, I was preparing for that and getting my prerequisite, my classes I needed, doing my internships in the hospital, And then my last year, like my 5th year, super senior year of college, I was like, I don't want to work in a hospital. And just because everyone in my family works in the hospital, it was easy, it made sense. But I realized I actually don't think I will be a good nurse.
Mm,
And I was like, well, I don't know what to do now. So
right.
I've spent everything all my time preparing for this one particular path. And I actually don't have a lot of connections in other areas. So what should I do? And I remember my 5th year of college, while I was just playing lacrosse and I was actually graduated, I applied to like 50 plus jobs, just shooting in the dark everywhere across the board, had no idea what I wanted to do. And I landed a position at LinkedIn, thankfully, and kind of just found my way internally of what's interesting to me. And what's interesting to me is being creative, helping people, consulting, helping them learn things. That's why learning and development is a really good path for me. But that was definitely a life transition for me because I had spent like so much of my life preparing for one thing, and had total resources to support that. And then going into tech was completely different and kind of building my own way. So
Yeah.
it's been for the better. I don't think I'd be good in the hospital, honestly.
I hear you, Kelly. I appreciate you sharing like how this realization just set you on this whole other path. I similarly had a career transition from higher education, academia to tech, and realizing that higher education, academia, that those weren't really the places for me. That was hugely disruptive. And then it was the meaning making in the transition that really mattered. And I see this user writing in saying, how they had this disruption of relocating to DC, but in fact, it had all these other effects that came after, right? Around finding a friend group, figuring out a new walking or running route, finding new grocery stores. And it's really all about that meaning making aspect of the life transition that I think is big. So going back to the COVID example for me, in the last year, I think for a while I was wallowing a bit, if I'm being honest. Even though I had all this stuff to do at work, I was really stuck in the big context of what was going on in the world, and I'm not really quite sure what happened, but at some point I was like, there's a lot going on for me internally that I want to sort out because I'm in this work environment that's really supportive. I have friends that care about me, and I'm still not feeling all the way there. And so I actually, started working with a coach again who I'd worked with in the past, or working with a therapist. And seriously, like the level of transformation for me that's come out of that in the last year has just been huge. Like the another big thing is just getting back into like an exercise routine, which really fell off track, has been this really meaningful part of my life in a way that it never was before. If you went back to my like 22 to 26-year-old self and said, you're going to have like a workout routine and really like it, it's going to be an important part of your life, you'd probably laugh you out of the room in your face. But that's been the meaning making journey for me, at least of the last year. And certainly colleagues like you have been an amazing part of finding that sense of belonging in it all.
That's great. I'm glad to hear you have a workout routine now. Did you ever get that stationary bike?
I didn't get a stationary bike, but there's a bunch of workout equipment behind the chair behind me. I'm not going to pull it out. No show and tell today.
Yeah. That's funny. Yeah, I think with COVID, like it impacted everybody differently, and a lot of people tapped into more like self-care and self-growth. Like Elizabeth, hello to you, saying like +1 to exercise, therapy, meaningful relationships. Those were things that we could definitely harness and lean into during the pandemic. So kind of want to go into our next major theme that Bruce talks about. And he goes into this theme of what he calls the ABCs. And he talks about A, which is the agency, what we as individuals make and what we build, where we spend our time. The B is belonging, really incorporating relationships and other people. And like he calls that the we story. And then C is the cause. What's our calling? What's our purpose? And hearing the story behind the greater picture.
Yeah.
And so what's interesting about this concept is you don't have to order these in ABC. Bruce talks about how everybody this impacts differently and they prioritize different ones. And so he says, I believe he says his is in the order of ABCs, but his wife is CAB. And so, Alex, have you had a chance to think about that and what it looks like for you?
Yeah, and more specifically, I think this is a great segue from or great connector to what we were just talking about in terms of this meaning making, whether it's in your career transition or thinking about COVID in the last year, because this is really kind of the things that we orient ourselves to make meaning in those transitions. So for me, this has changed over time, I think. And a big one, I think a big one for me, I probably somewhere like heavily between cause and belonging on the front end. And then agency is kind of the last piece for me, interestingly.
Mm.
And I'd say when I was a student and then in graduate school and in higher ed and academia, for some reason, cause was always at the beginning for me, like having a cause, having bigger thing that I was aspiring to. The ideas, the theory, the philosophy was really important to me. And then belonging came sort of far behind, and then agency was less. And now I'd say belonging is a lot more important and a lot closer to cause than it was before. But the me making the agency autonomy part of it, interestingly, I find that often comes out of the community I build around me, the commitments I have, the values I have, the cause, the calling, the purpose piece. What about you, Kelly?
Yeah. So if I heard that correctly, are you CAB?
No, I'm CBA.
CBA. Okay. So
Yeah,
cause, belonging,
exactly reverse
agency.
because you know I have to be contrarian.
Yeah. Classic, Alex. Classic. Um, for me, it's interesting. I feel differently. I know you and I are super different. I think what hits home for me first is relationships. I'm all about relationships and my personal connections with my friends, family, and my colleagues who I consider my friends. Like LinkedIn is a very good place for me to work because relationships matter as part of our culture. And in fact, I was actually talking to one of our new LinkedIn employees yesterday, and I shared with her, oh, the proudest part of my work is the relationships I've built with people at LinkedIn. And I totally stand true to that. Like, I just found huge value in getting to know people and maintaining relationships. Next, what comes most naturally to me is agency and me. And it's super easy for me to just feel motivated for my growth and development and fill the plate. And I like overfill the plate. So during COVID, I started a master's program, evening and weekend MBA program, and that has definitely filled my time completely. And although it's like oftentimes very stressful with work, it's something that I can easily motivate myself to do because it's like my story of continued development and learning. And like C for me, the cause is definitely last. Like I would love to be like, yes, I'm doing all these things, working so hard day to day to establish like this 5 years down the road. But I'm actually someone who never answers the like, where will you be in 5 years conversation because I just go to the doors that are open. And so I don't have like a larger cause or calling or purpose. And that's definitely like, you know, it's not something I think about day to day. So it's interesting to see like that's kind of what drives you and that's the last for me.
Totally. Yeah, and that's the beauty in all of this is that like each of us is making meaning of these life transitions in totally different ways. And I think that's what's really powerful about, Bruce's work and this podcast is to realize like there are some common themes, but there also are real differences between each of us. And that's kind of what's special and important about these life transitions. I would be curious to know from folks who are on on the live right now, would love for you to drop in the chat in the comments. What's your order? Are you ABC? Are you CBA? Are you BAC? What is your order of meaning making? Again, agency, autonomy, belonging, and cause. We'd love to see from you kind of how you make meaning in that order.
Yeah, we have some great guests on the call today. I see Alex, we have someone saying hello to you. We have representation from Virginia, and another life, well, I think it's life transition is having kids. And so I see my dad is John Chuck in the chat, saying that kids are one of life's best and most challenging adventures. Hopefully it's best because I am your child, but I don't know. And then, we have Caroline. Okay, Caroline used to be on our learning and development team. Congrats on your next play, Caroline. She says BCA, belonging, cause, agency. I can see that for Caroline. What about you, Alex?
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Love it, Caroline. And you're definitely still part of my belonging world in the Bay Area, even though you've moved on. It's very sad, but we're happy for you.
Yeah, I can plus one to that. I feel like when I joined the L&D team, Caroline joined before me. She made me feel like I totally belonged and like supported. So I totally see that in her. For real.
Absolutely. Well, it's so interesting as we're talking about making meaning of these life transitions. I'm also thinking, Kelly, about Leah saying CAB. That also makes sense. And I'm also thinking not just the ABCs of the meaning making in the life transitions, but also this last piece that Bruce talks about of the saying goodbye, the messy middle, the writing the new stories, that we get those three different phases. And one thing that he talks about is to think about which one are you worst at and which one are you maybe best at, and to lean in immediately to the one that you're best at, but also not to skip the one that maybe you're not as strong at. So I think back to my own career transition, going from academia in higher ed into tech. And I have to say, the part that I struggled with the most there was probably the saying goodbye, the giving up. I don't want to call it giving up, but it did feel like giving up at the time. It really did. I'll just be honest. It felt like giving up on a fantasy of like prestige in the university, of being a distinguished professor or something like that. Like that idea was really, really, really powerful for me. And so letting that go and saying goodbye to that was really hard. And what I found easiest actually was the messy middle. So finding new and different things to do that were part of this new life that I was imagining for myself, figuring out what it was I liked and where I wanted to go, and actually taking those concrete steps towards it. And then I think in terms of writing the new story, I feel like that I honestly maybe am not fully getting that part, but because it feels like that part is always ongoing for me. Like the writing new story, it always feels like I'm writing a new story. And while I certainly feel fully transitioned into tech and learning and development at this point, I feel like that's a story I'm still writing, and I'm loving that as well. But usually I personally like to lean into that messy middle when I'm trying to do something next, because I just know that that's the place where I'm going to discover like what's leading me and what's driving me in a new direction. What about you, Kelly?
Yeah, well, first, it's really cool to hear your reflection as your colleague and your friend. And I totally see you thriving in the messy middle, which is something I've always admired. I'm like, how is this happening? And it's cool to see you. I think we've worked together for 2 years now. Alex and I were desk buddies.
Yes.
In writing your new story, Alex has done like a ton of builds and development for LinkedIn, which has been really cool to see. That's been scaled across the company. And let's see, for me, I've always known that you and I are very different. And I think like same with the ABCs, we're different here. I think for me, the easiest one, my strength would be writing the new story. like I was saying before, like it's easy for me to think about new things, like filling the plate and growing as an individual. Um, and the first two, I'm actually like really uncomfortable with. I am not good at prioritizing and like taking things off of my plate. So like saying goodbye is difficult. I'm someone who tries to do like everything at once, even at work. Like for the past 3 weeks, I was like juggling 3 jobs basically, and it was hard for me to pass anything off because of just the history of working on it. And then whereas you thrive in the messy middle, I hate ambiguity. I will like commit to something even though I don't feel committed just to avoid ambiguity. I don't like the messy middle. I definitely do not thrive. I like structure. I like decision. And that's a really hard place for me to be in. And I kind of experienced that in my last year of college, messy middle between like healthcare and tech, which is so different. In that messy middle, I was not cool with, and like what that did is cause me to apply like 50 jobs all over the board. So really interesting to see our differences and how we apply that.
You know what? I love that though, because that again, we're seeing we're all going to handle these life transitions differently, and each of us has different areas and strengths that we're going to lean into to carry us forward. And then there are the other areas where maybe we get some support, right? Like one thing I appreciate about you, Kelly, and working with you is that when we're working together, you're always driving me to do that new thing and to get squarely into that next space. And I think that finding that the ways to complement one another and support one another with the people who are around you can just be super, super powerful.
Yeah, completely. I totally resonate with you on that. And I think one more thing I wanted to add to the messy middle is like when I do feel that way, I like take total action. And I saw some things in the chat. I think Elizabeth said this, and I think you may have said this with life coaches, therapy. I totally take advantage of that to navigate the messy middle. I've got 3 coaches. I've got a coach with school through USC that I meet with regularly. I've got my coach at LinkedIn, like different mentors that I meet with for development. And then I have like a personal life coach that helps me navigate that messy middle. So that's how I respond to the messy middle, is like trying to bring structure and help and order.
For sure. That makes so much sense. And I'm seeing more comments in the chat around you know I see this one comment: clarity plus action equals rewritten story. Love that we're bringing clarity to what we're doing, we're taking action, and then we're starting to rewrite the story of whatever transition it is that we're going through. And I also just want to acknowledge we have such a global audience here today. I see Grenada. I know Aoife's in Belgium, and Melissa is joining us from Dublin, Ireland. That's incredible. So love seeing our totally global audience today. Kelly, I'm sort of struck by this life transition. I think we've like really covered it. I have one more I could share just to sort of illustrate it in my life, and it's kind of for me probably the most important one. What do you think?
Please, I think it would be great for you to share that.
Awesome. Well, I see also someone is coming in from Detroit, Michigan. I'm from the Metro Detroit area originally. And the story I'm going to share actually took place when I was living in Southeast Michigan, and I was a student at the University of Michigan. And the life quake, probably the definitional life quake for me of my life, was in my second year of undergrad, my father actually passed away. And it was so like shattering at the time. It was a bit unexpected. He had struggled a long time with his addiction, and it finally took his life, and it was very sad. And at the same time, I immediately started to make so much meaning out of it. The biggest thing that I immediately took away was like, we have this one precious life to live. what do I want to be doing with it? How do I want to be filling my time? And at the time, I was actually struggling, to define myself personally and professionally, as you do when you're 20 years old, and your whole life, really. But especially at 20, it feels extra angsty. And one thing that I was going through was, I was like, am I going to come out and be honest about being a queer person, or am I going to live the life that I've grown up believing that I have to live, of being closeted or playing heterosexual? And I was finally like, I have this one amazing life to live, and I'm going to live it authentically and in a real way. And came out to friends and family. It just felt so much more embodied in myself. It's still one of the best summers ever. Weirdly, after my dad passed away, spending the summer in Ann Arbor with some really great friends and housemates, and and on a more professional level at the time, similar to you, I was struggling with, like, what do I study? And there were so many demands on me to go into the sciences or become a doctor. And what I really loved and cared about was languages, cultures, getting a chance to interact with the rest of the world. And so this was this moment to rewrite the story. And I actually leaned into what my passions were and studied German and French. And I wouldn't be here at LinkedIn if I hadn't made that decision, because it took me down this whole track of studying, underrepresented groups and different marginalized groups throughout cultural history. And that is a huge part of what informs my work now. So yeah, lifequakes, massive personal lifequakes can happen. They affect us personally, they affect us professionally. And it's about going through those three phases of the lifequake. The life transition. It's about those three ways that we make meaning. And you know what? Both of us are going to experience more lifequakes before it's all over, Kelly. It's kind of wild.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the only thing we know for sure. And just thank you so much for sharing that story and opening up, being vulnerable with everyone on the LinkedIn Live. I'm sorry. You're getting lots of love in the chat from Melissa Shannon, thinking about you for 20-year-old Alex. But I love seeing how you came out of that, being a more authentic you, and how it shaped you.
Thank you, Kelly.
And I just appreciate you sharing that with us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what In the Arena is about, is having the real vulnerable conversations and being a little bit more honest about what are those factors that shape us. And so that was why I really appreciated this episode of In the Arena Live. And I'm kind of thinking about what our one action is that we want people to take as we're coming up on the end of our time here today, Kelly. And I think for me, it's really thinking about, is there one part of your story, maybe a life quake or a life transition, that really defines you, that perhaps you feel ready to share, but you haven't felt quite ready yet, and you're ready to share that with others so they have a little bit more insight into who you are and how you tick. What do you think about that as the next action?
I like that. I mean, I like what Devin's saying in the chat right now. #go for it. Hopefully this conversation has given you some confidence to share that story with somebody, and just realize that it's a really telling, informative experience in your life, and having a conversation about it might bring some reflection or learning. So I love that challenge, Alex.
Great.
Thanks for putting that up.
So #go for it. Share the story of your defining life transition with somebody, or a defining life transition if the defining one isn't quite processed yet. And we want you also to join us again next week, same place, same time, for In the Arena Live. And as you're listening to this amazing podcast, please subscribe to In the Arena wherever you get your podcasts. And we'd also really appreciate it if you could rate and review. It certainly helps what we're doing here and trying to build this community of vulnerable, authentic conversations.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, so much for coming today. Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you, everyone. Great to see you all.
Bye.